On February 20th, 1995, the body of 40-year-old Joyce Dennis was found in a bloody scene at the Philadelphia laundromat where she worked. According to witnesses, 18-year-old Eddie Ramirez was attending a party across the street and had allegedly left to get a soda. Despite witness statements that were inconsistent with each other and the facts of the crime, one constant remained: the involvement of Eddie Ramirez, who was sent to prison for life. But this is wrongful conviction.
My name is Eddie Ramirez, and I was in prison for 27 and a half years for something I didn't do.
So let's start at the beginning, which is where I like to start. Tell me where you were born, who your parents are. Do you have siblings? Tell me about family life.
I was born and raised in Philly, and I went to school. First part of my early education was in Catholic school, and then I transferred over to the Philadelphia Public School. I have two older sisters who were both my protectors and my bullies, and I love them. My father's now a retired Philadelphia police officer and also retired as an investigator for the Public Defender's Office. My mother was involved in, various healthcare situations throughout her working career, and she's also now retired. My upbringing was pretty modest, pretty working class family. I never knew poverty. I never wanted for anything.
Yeah. Tell me about growing up in Philly back then. You said North Philly?
It depends on what you define as North Philly.
Okay.
It is technically North Philly, but people from North Philly might not think of my neighborhood as being North Philly. I'm Logan, north of the boulevard.
Okay.
There were trees on my block.
Which, for this time, I did the podcast with Suave about the Badlands. Very different.
Right.
Okay.
So that's why there's this sort of like a dispute about what's North Philly, what's not North Philly. While there were drugs in my neighborhood, it probably wasn't as visible as some of the other neighborhoods throughout North Philly. We did have a driveway behind my house where the kids from 9th Street and the kids from Hutchinson Street gathered to play sports, freeze tag. We were normal kids.
This sounds very different from a lot of stories I've heard from North Philly at the time. So were you ever involved in any kind of crime, drugs, anything like that?
No, I mean, I was a graffiti writer as a kid. So, that.
So bad.
Yeah. I did have an incident where a friend of mine stole a car and he came to pick me up at 2:00 in the morning. And so I asked him if I could drive because who was I going to run into at 2:00 in the morning? That ended up getting, I got arrested for that. And there was an occasion where we were hanging out in an abandoned house and I got arrested for criminal trespass. But other than those two things, no.
No robberies, no guns.
No. And in fact, being the son of a police officer, I've never even seen a gun.
Wow. Yeah, so tell me about that. I mean, that is really something so fascinating to your case, is that your father is a retired police officer and at the time was a police officer.
No, at the time he was not. He was already retired.
He was retired,
and
okay.
He was working as an investigator for the Public Defender's Office.
Still crazy.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about what that was like to have your father in law enforcement in a way.
Oh, wow. I kind of it was the first part of my life where I sort of idolized the police because I actually saw them as heroes. And then sort of I guess as many teenagers do, it's kind of like, fuck the pigs, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I ever had that with any sort of serious intent in mind because not only was my father a police officer, I have several uncles who were sheriffs and prison guards. I grew up in a law enforcement family.
Wow.
And so, I always loved them. I just never thought of the police as being corrupt.
Do you think they were corrupt in your case?
Absolutely. I mean, I ended up in prison for something I didn't do. You know what I mean? And I don't think it was by accident. Mm-hmm. I just think that different time, and I want to believe that times are getting better, and relations are getting better, and practices are getting better. But I have nothing to sort of point to suggest that, honestly.
Did your father know anybody that were in any law enforcement that was involved in your case?
I can't really say for sure.
Yeah.
So I don't want to speculate.
Yeah, for sure. Did he always believe in your innocence?
100%.
Really?
Well, it was just, I was with my father.
Tell me about that.
So I'm not going to get too deep into it because of the situation, but I was with my father the day of the crime. So for them to say that I committed something when I was with him, he couldn't believe it. And in fact, my father is the one that made arrangements for me to talk to the police when they were initially trying to interview me.
Wow. So he trusted the system too.
Oh yeah.
There was no way his son was going to be wrongfully convicted.
This was a big disappointment for everybody in my family. This was reality challenging for everyone in my family.
Absolutely. So you were 18. What were your hopes and plans for the future?
So mostly because I was a kid, and I don't know that any kid has any sort of like clear, very few kids have a clear idea of what they want to be when they grow up. It's a very confusing time when you're a teenager. You want to be everything, and you probably don't have the discipline to know how to be anything. And so that was the case with me. And so mostly I just wanted to just be happy. I just wanted to have a comfortable life, celebrating it with family and friends.
And what would that look like?
At the time, I probably can't remember what it would look like. At the time, it probably would have been like smoking weed, watching rap videos, skateboarding.
Yeah.
Like that. And I'm trying to think how much of that has changed in the last 30 years. Because I still I don't smoke weed anymore, but I still watch rap videos and I still skateboard.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, let me not exaggerate the greatness of my skateboard.
I was going to say, did you skateboard in prison? Because you've only been out a few months.
I have skateboarded since I've been home, and I can tell you that as a 48-year-old, it affects the joints differently.
I'm scared.
I am worried about falling. I'm going to break a hip. So no, yeah. So this still holds true. What's fun for me, what's good for me, is really the thing that I enjoy is being in the company of people who are enjoying themselves. Mm. So like, if I could sort of like enable that, that's when I'm at my happiest. Mm. And that was true then as well.
So how did you know these guys that you were hanging out with that night, Billy and Pete?
Well, Pete, I didn't know that well at all.
Okay.
Pete was Billy's friend.
Okay.
Billy was someone who I'd met in years prior to that. Not many years. I didn't know him that well. Now thinking about it, I'm like, man, I didn't know that guy at all.
No.
So it's hard to answer that question, because to answer that question would really require me knowing something about him more than what came out in the case.
Yeah.
And those things I'm definitely not about. So.
Yeah. So, Michael, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Michael Wiseman. I'm a lawyer in Pennsylvania. I work in a small firm called Wiseman and Schwartz, and we do a lot of work with the Innocence Project, and we've developed our own Innocence docket as well, independent of the Innocence Project. And I got involved in Eddie's case in 2015, which was an interesting story in itself. Eddie, could you pass me a tissue? I'm not crying for Eddie, although I do cry for my clients. I just seem to have some kind of allergy or something. But I'm allergic to the limelight.
How did you get involved in his case?
Yeah, in 2015, now federal Third Circuit Judge Ariana Freeman, who I hired when I worked at the Federal Defender Office, asked me if I would join Eddie's case. At that point, she was representing Eddie in federal court, but she needed someone to sign on to litigate the case in state court. And I said, of course. And then shortly after that, the Innocence Project got involved. Needless to say, when the Innocence Project got involved, the case kind of exploded and, went in all kinds of different directions that I don't know that any of us anticipated at the time. So I've been with Eddie. I remember meeting him for the first time in the visiting room in Graterford. I was there to see another client, and I didn't know what he looked like, and he introduced himself to me when I was walking by.
Who was that? What client were you visiting?
Oh, I can't remember that.
Okay.
That's a tall order, but it was just impressive that Eddie, sort of introduced himself. And I think you were with your mom at the time.
It was.
Yeah. And, it was, oh, thank you. It was pro bono at the time. It still is, or was, I should say. But, of course, I I was happy to help. So that was when I first met Eddie, and over time, I've come to truly admire him as an individual, as a man, and as a resilient human being.
So
And he's learned to sort of bear with my sort of like overbearing personality.
if there's
sometimes.
anything I've learned from you guys at Greaterford and Philadelphia, you are all big personalities.
We're bosses.
Yes. If there's anything I've learned from meeting
Yeah.
all you. So can you walk me through this case? And I think the way I want to do it is the facts, and then there's what the prosecution says, and then there's what
Yeah.
happened. So let's start with, what are the facts we agree on?
Well, so the facts are roughly sometime between midnight and about 2 a.m. I don't remember the date. The police were summoned to this laundromat. The deceased's husband was concerned because she hadn't come home. She would close up the laundromat late at night, and she hadn't come home and hadn't called. So he went to the laundromat, and when he went inside, he saw blood, and he flagged down a cop who arrived at the scene, and they investigated and discovered the victim's body, and she was beaten to death, basically, looked like with a metal pole that was on the in the laundromat at the time. So that's the basic facts of the case. How they came to be focused on Eddie is truly remarkable to me. It all
Yeah.
had to do with his allegedly having gone to the laundromat to buy a soda for the dad of one of the people who was at this little gathering that Eddie was supposedly at. And I can't honestly remember if you were at that gathering or if you had left that gathering, and this is all just made up, and you don't have to answer that, but this is part of the sort
Right.
of
Well, let
you know,
me say, because what I have in my notes is that he was hanging out with some friends across the street. That was the
right,
dad. That okay.
right.
So there was a couple guys hanging out across the street.
Right. And right. My point is I'm not certain
Right.
what his reality is to when Eddie left that
Right.
gathering.
Okay.
But in any event, the fact that someone, I think it was the dad of this girl who wanted the soda, reported to the police that, oh, Eddie went to the laundromat to get a
Mm,
soda, and that's it.
that's
They were off to the races. Eddie's the suspect, and and that's how they sort of focused on him. Of course, they also got to Billy Wyahe at some point, who well, let me just back up. I mean, one theme in this case was the coercion of a bunch of teenagers. So, I mean, the cops got all these, 15, 16, 17-year olds, in the station, or as they used to call it, the roundhouse, and basically, wouldn't let them go until they gave up Eddie. And so, of these 6 or so people who gave statements against Eddie, all but Billy Wyahe has recanted that statement. So all these kids, were forced to implicate Eddie. Yeah, he made admissions to me. I saw him with blood on him. I saw him with a pocket full of quarters, none of which is true.
mm-hmm.
And um, they've all recanted, except for Billy Wyahe, who, of course, took a deal, did 5 to 15, and or 5 to 10, and has been out of prison for quite some time. So, there's more to the case as it developed in terms of the suppressed information that was not revealed at the time of trial, which I can go into now or later.
Well, I
But
want to know, what was it about his case that stuck out to you that you were like, oh, I want to take this?
well, I can't say that I knew that at the time. I agreed. I agreed because Ariana asked me, and she was dear, and so I said, of course. I, I, I often answer the phone that I'm the guilty project. I don't really care if someone did it or not. My job is to, of course, offer the best defense that I can. So I don't ask those kinds of questions initially. And, frankly, until I got into Eddie's case and learned about it, I had no idea if he did it or not.
Wow.
It was only, after seeing all the evidence that the prosecution hid that it became obvious to any objective observer that he didn't commit this crime.
So what was some of that?
Well, the I would say the main suppressed items were the fact that the scene was quite literally a bloody mess. I mean, this woman was beaten with a metal pole to death. there was blood splatter all over this room she was found in. And by many accounts, when Eddie returned from getting this can of soda, he was no blood on him at all. And it was really inconceivable that a person who would have committed this crime would have, gotten away from there with literally no blood. Um, the prosecution suppressed the fact that it was a bloody scene, and at the trial, the initial trial proceedings, the defense was trying to make a point that Eddie was not seen with blood on him, but they hid the fact that the place was awash in blood. So that was a significant feature. The DNA evidence that the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office before Larry Krasner resisted our testing also turned out to be significant. So, to make a long story short, the consistent DNA profile was found on the murder weapon and on a fleece that was believed to have been worn by the murderer.
And that was evidence that was there from the beginning.
Well, it was there, but there was never DNA testing done on it.
Right. So, when was the testing done?
That was done in, I want to say, within the last 3 or 4 years. You can correct me?
2019.
Okay, right. So I was close. 5 years.
And I think I read that a judge granted the testing in 2003.
Well, that's the
different testing.
Yeah.
So, what happened was there was a post-conviction proceeding in the early 2000s related to a disclosure that the victim had scrapings. They took scrapings from the victim's fingernails, and that was tested, but it was tested at a time when it was very unsophisticated and didn't really reveal any result. And I think the judge at that time made some sort of finding that, well, I don't care anyway, because you'd expect someone who worked in a laundromat to have people's DNA, sort of missing the point that, when someone is fighting off an attacker, they're going to get skin cells under their fingernails. So that was a different set of DNA testing. The more recent stuff from 2019, which we actually lost that effort to have that testing done. And it was only when the Krasner administration was elected that they agreed to allow the testing to go forward. Wow. We had already filed an appeal in the appellate court seeking that testing. And let me just divert for a minute, because I know Eddie has a lot of frustration with the Krasner administration and how long this took. So I'm not here as an apologist for the Krasner administration or a cheerleader, but it is notable that they agreed to testing that turned out to be very significant when their predecessors would not. And in fact, actively resisted it.
Thank you for clarifying.
Can I just add something to that? Because while I do have some criticism of the Krasner administration, I absolutely acknowledge that it is night and day between the Krasner administration and previous administrations.
Who was the previous administration?
Seth Williams before him, and Lynn Abraham before him.
Oh,
Lynn Abraham, at a time was known as the deadliest DA.
Yeah. Who was your prosecutor?
The assistant district attorney in my case was a guy by the name of Mark Gilson. And I just want to say that I absolutely commend the Krasner administration for the work that they've done. Specifically, Katie Ernst, who is the chief of the federal litigation unit, and Dave Napierski, who's in there now. And there's just a team of people in there who are really committed to getting the right job done. Unfortunately, with the good comes the bad, or there's always room for improvement. I never want any organization to sort of laud itself and say, "Oh, we're done. The job is done." No, you can do better. And in my case, specifically, was that it took, in my opinion, it took too long to conclude what was obvious.
Well, so that was my question. I guess I was confused from my notes. It seemed like the first post-conviction hearing, I thought they had tested it and you were excluded then. So they knew for years it wasn't you.
So can I clear that?
Go ahead.
Okay, so there was the fingernail clippings that was taken from the deceased for genetic testing. That genetic testing was never done. Those fingernail clippings were kept in a refrigerator in the office of the medical examiner. When it was made known to me in 2000, we went through a series of legal proceedings to have those fingernail scrapings tested. They did yield genetic material. There was testing done on the fingernail clippings from, I believe, the right hand. I was positively excluded as a source.
That's what I thought. Okay.
And from the left hand, it was inconsistent, but there was not enough material there to develop a robust profile.
But still, even then, if it's saying you were not a contributor,
Yeah.
they knew that.
This is to what Michael was saying. A judge in 2006 basically said DNA floats in the air, and he said, I mean, it's on record. He says right now, you know, your DNA is under my fingernails, and he determined that if we could not provide an expert to testify as to how specifically DNA is deposited on the fingernails, then he was going to dismiss the issue. And when that's exactly what he did. And even after we offered to provide an expert, the director of the laboratory that did the examination, the analysis, he still denied it. Wow. So it went on for another, that was in 2006.
It's so frustrating because often you hear there was DNA and it was just never tested, but here it was actually tested.
Yeah. Oh, they said it was because it's not a rape case. It's not determinative of anything.
Okay. That's, yeah, I'm just like kind of shocked.
Yeah. And I think to put it all in maybe fuller context, the judge is looking at all these teenagers who fingered Eddie. Yeah. And he's looking at, the other evidence in the case and thinking, oh, well, this is silliness, not to excuse this judge who was a knucklehead at the time, still is, I imagine, right? But the point is that it was easy for the judge to sort of blow off that DNA result because of the other
you have all
evidence,
these witnesses,
saying he confessed that he did it.
And I think that this is sort of indicative of the practices at the time, that judges by and large are sort of they wrestle with the concept of a wrongful conviction. Just before Larry Krasner came into the office, you might be lucky if one guy got a sentence overturned in a year, let alone multiple. It's happening. I mean, I think the Claudio said he was having hearings every week on people who were potentially innocent.
Lynn Abraham's nickname was like the bringer of death or something.
The deadliest DA in America.
Yeah, deadliest.
It's not a nickname. It was the headline.
Yeah.
Sunday Times Magazine in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, I did that a lot with Roger King for Suave's case. I know all about those administrations. It's horrible. So we were talking about the investigation. All these kids are threatened, and so they finger Eddie. How did the trial go? Can you tell me a bit about the trial?
Well, I think Eddie's, trial lawyer, who ironically was a DA named Jack McMahon.
So Jack McMahon, who is a skilled orator, his strategy was to rely on his abilities to impeach the witnesses based on their own inconsistent testimony. His investigation was almost non-existent. Because had he done an investigation, he might have found out that there were fingernail clippings and would have been able to use that. And this is a case that had absolutely no physical evidence. It relied solely on the testimony of people who had given prior inconsistent statements.
Which is incredible to me because the weapon was there, but nothing was taken. There was no evidence on the weapon.
It was checked. It was like checked for fingerprints. But remember, this is 1995. Right. And so DNA is still sort of relatively new at the time. So it was checked for fingerprints, but there were no fingerprints or anything like that.
I think the more precise way to put it is that there was no inculpatory evidence.
Yeah.
Inculpatory to Eddie. There was evidence. It just, it didn't include Eddie.
And Eddie, at this time when all these kids, some people you were friends with were saying you did this, what was your reaction? What were you doing?
Shock. I couldn't, the people who, again, I'm a loyal person. I'm a loyal friend. I couldn't rationalize like how this was happening or why. I was too young and too naive to understand just how selfish people can be. And that goes for, the witnesses in my case and the police department and the district attorney's office at the time, how wicked they could be and sort of callous. And it was also, I'm going to say this, and this is the only time I'm going to say this, because I don't want to do this. This is out of respect for the victim and the victim's family. This was an injury to them as well. It denied justice to them. And so at 19, 20 years old, I didn't have the language to sort of articulate that. And so I just wrestled with emotions that I didn't know how to deal with.
Yeah. I'm wondering, your dad at this time as law enforcement, what was he doing? Was he trying to talk to people? Was he screaming at the top of his lungs like, my son didn't do this?
No, my father thought, growing up in law enforcement, he thought they'll get it right.
So then, even when you're at trial, he's like...
Even on appeal, he just wanted to put faith in the system. And it was difficult, because who prepares for something like this? There's no emergency kit for wrongful conviction. Mm-hmm.
Especially back then, yeah.
Not even now. Mm-hmm. What person says, hey, let me prepare for a rainy day in the case I get arrested for something I didn't do? So that's not something you prepare for. It's just something you're in the moment. And when the moment comes, for some people, it catches you off guard. And I learned that, we often talk about fight or flight responses. There's a third option, which is to freeze. And a lot of people freeze. Mm. As much as I love my father, my father didn't feel he had, many people in my family didn't feel they had an adequate resources, and they didn't the knowledge of how to sort of address that situation, and so they trusted my attorneys, and in many ways I'm glad that they did, because oftentimes when families get involved, they sometimes conflict with sound strategies, because they're not the experts. Right. There were plenty of times. This is I talk about Michael having dealt with me, because there were plenty of times where I would be like, Michael, we need to do this, and I'm gung ho. I can't see the bigger picture because I don't have the experience that Michael has. Michael's been doing this a long time. I'm not going to say. A long time.
43 years.
We'll have to date it.
Right.
So, his experience is invaluable. Like, it overshadows mine. I'm just a kid compared to Michael.
Well, you weren't a kid when I met you, but it's not just the experience, it's the emotions. I mean, it's hard, they always, right. That old saying, don't be your own lawyer. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that, because it's hard to detach yourself from what you believe to be the issues in the case from what they may be.
And so my father he wrestled with that. And I'm sure that there's we second guess ourselves all the time, right? We always leave a conversation thinking, damn, I could have said that better.
Do you ever think your family at all ever questioned you?
No. Absolutely not.
I've seen a lot of families in my time, and I can tell you that Eddie's family was as steadfast as any I've ever seen. I mean, every court appearance. I mean, I used to dread having to go to court, because it'd be like, I have nothing I can tell Eddie's mom, who just sits there with tears in her eyes and, waiting for good news. And I mean, just the tenacity and the gumption of the family was amazing. His sister was the same way. And
which sister?
My sister Millie. My sister Susie was more of a. She would keep me calm. My sister Susie is the oldest of us, and so where my sister Susie would talk to me about art and music and clothes, which are things that I love, right? Those were the things that sort of made me comfortable. Mm. Whereas my sister Millie was my protector. Mm-hmm. And so, all the things that I needed to sort of feel loved, my sisters gave to me in different ways.
I love that. Yeah. When you were awaiting trial, did you bond out or did you sit in jail?
I sat in prison. I don't know if the laws have changed.
No, you can't.
There was when you're charged in Pennsylvania, when you're charged with a capital crime, there is no bail. Mm.
It's use out there. What is it like being 18, 19, a little boy sitting in jail? Especially a little boy that has no interactions with street life, these kind of people.
No, all of that played a role. You go into prison and you go into jail, and a lot of these guys know each other from the neighborhood, or they know people who know them, and so there are all these 6 degrees of separation, whereas I was alone. But I think I conduct myself well. And so while underneath the surface, there was always for me, always a nervousness. I have a confidence that I don't get involved in your business. Don't get involved in my business. We're gonna be okay. And it pretty much worked out that way for almost 28 years.
At the moment of conviction, or right before that, did you think you were going to be convicted?
No, man. Like
Did you feel like your trial went okay?
Oh my God. Like Jack McMahon successfully got William Wahi to admit that he told the detectives he was lying, statements that were never recorded and that were withheld from me. Not just on one occasion, but on 2 occasions. And so I was like, oh, that's it. The main witness just admitted that he had lied to the police.
On the stand?
On the stand, in front of the jury.
And so you guys were like, that's it?
In my mind, I thought that was as conclusive as it could get. Not to the jury.
So when you heard that you were convicted of second-degree murder, what happened?
I did not allow myself to process it in probably the most healthy way. I suppressed it. I thought, and this goes back to my arrest. When I was, I never thought I would be arrested for something I didn't do, and then I was.
Yeah. So you had that first interview, very, very quick.
Yeah, I thought, oh, okay.
And you're like, done.
Yeah. I'm not going to be arrested for something I didn't do. That doesn't happen, right? I went about my life. When they arrested me, I said, okay, cool. They arrested me at work, and I thought, okay, they clearly they made a mistake, and cooler heads will prevail. Let me do what I can so I can get back to work. They didn't let me out of jail for another. I stayed in jail for 20 months awaiting trial.
Where were you working?
I was working at a gas station in Bucks County.
Okay.
The overnight attendant.
Okay. Wow.
And then when I was convicted, I thought to myself, well, I'm arrested. I'm held for trial. And I think to myself, okay, cool. At some point, they're going to realize this is a mistake and they're going to drop the charges and they're going to release me. Like I was in denial up until, it really didn't sink in. Maybe till after 2006.
I was going to say, how long did it take you to process, this is my life?
It was a long time. Oh, matter of fact, it was 2006. I remember the date, November 10th, 2006.
Why that date?
That's my birthday. And it was, so let's just say November 9th going into November 10th at midnight, when the clock struck midnight, and I realized I had just turned 30 and I had spent all of my 20s in prison.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, this is real.
Wow.
And I didn't, I never really doubted, but I always knew that there was a chance that I could spend the rest of my life in prison.
Yeah.
Up until the end.
Well, no, yeah, right. When we got to that point, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was.
Well, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. So, Michael, do you think that his trial was fair? I mean,
well, it can't be a fair trial when evidence is suppressed. That's fundamental to any system of justice, and so the answer is an obvious and resounding no.
Yeah. So you were talking before, Eddie, about your prison life and all of the absolutely incredible things you've done. So what were the first years like, though, when you were still a little boy and you're in prison and you're around actual bad guys?
I stayed to myself. Like, now I wasn't so much isolated as I wanted to learn from my mistakes. And my biggest mistake was associating with people who I didn't have much in common with, right? And so I'll say that lasted up until maybe 2003. So I'm 27 at the time? And I ended up at Graterford. And that changed my life. I met guys like Suave, Tyrone Wirtz, Albert Bandy. I met Sam Magic Brown. I met a crew of guys, Sharif Aladdin.
Are any of those guys still in there?
Yeah, some of them sadly have passed away. And it has hurt. It has hurt that my mentors, some of my brothers are never going to come home.
You've told me about this. Maybe you want to discuss, the sorts of things that you were taught by these men.
Oh, I was raised by them. Whereas my family taught me love and tolerance, because I never, my family, I remember before I went to prison, I used to tell people racism is dead.
Mm.
I used to tell people the only color that matters is green. That's what I used to tell people. The real discrimination in this country is between the wealthy and the poor.
Mm.
That's what I used to tell people until all this happened. And then I realized, oh, there's another facet to this thing. And it became really clear as I started investigating the trends in criminal injustice.
Mm.
So where my family taught me love and tolerance, my brothers at Graterford taught me how to be a man.
Mm.
They taught me how to be an adult. And when I say man, I don't mean in no kind of toxic masculinity, because they also taught, like, I already had this sense of tolerance, right? I already had this sense of respect. They say, nah, man, when you give your word, you keep your word. It's just this. There was one lesson I got about integrity, right? And integrity is the soundness of a thing. And when you do not keep your word, you are out of the soundness of that thing. You are out of integrity. And if you experience the sort of tumult in your life, the first question you have to ask yourself is, are you in the soundness of that state?
I just have a question. Where, I have heard a lot about Graterford being this place that, obviously Suave did such great things in, and you've done great things in, and you mentioned some before that we got cut off, so I need you to say them again. But how does that happen in a prison? How do these guys, some of them did do crimes, how do they suddenly just become these kind of like Dalai Lama guru guys?
Because most of the crimes that were committed when they were young men. And they you sit in, you go to prison and you start to see the effect of the crimes you've committed. And then they start to, you mature. And so for those guys, I mean, it happens for everyone, but it happens differently, right? And so those guys who are, for all intents and purposes, never going to leave the prison, what do you have? You have your legacy.
Mm.
You have the way that you affect other people going out into the world, and they take that piece of you with them.
And that's kind of what you were thinking, because you were never going to go home.
Oh, no. I knew I was going to go home.
You did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, there were times where I questioned it, but I would snap myself back to reality, yo, prepare. And so from the minute, these guys, I met them, and they were like, are you going home? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm going home. All right, well, start preparing right now.
So what was that?
That was my education. That was putting together a little bit of money. That was building my social network. That was really understanding who I am and what I have to offer the world, because that's the thing that's going to sustain me.
So tell me about some of those programs, like you were talking about LaSalle and.
Oh, so LASALE, the Latin American Cultural Exchange Organization, when I met Suave, he was the president of that organization. And this is an organization that, in addition to sort of bringing culturally enriching activities into the prison, also did things for the surrounding communities, such as the Educational Incarceration Scholarship Fund. And we donated money to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, to the pediatric ward. We did book drives, school supply programs, everything. And it really, the hardest of guys felt a sense of belonging, because they were giving back to the community.
And I want to be clear, this is not glorifying prison and saying oh, you go to prison, you come out a good guy. This is actually because this specific prison allowed you to have programming to do that. So Michael, you come on the case. What do you start doing? What are you like, all right, this is what needs to be done in this case?
Well, I have to, in all candor, give credit to the Innocence Project and Neil Msangvi in particular, because she really was leading the charge. And the thing to keep in mind is that the harassment and the threats against these teenagers to finger Eddie is something that now has a name. It's called the Homicide Hotel.
Mm.
So it's pretty much an established practice back at that time that what the Philadelphia Homicide Unit would do is they would bring in witnesses and they'd basically just hold them for days until they.
Tell me about some of the interrogations with these kids. I mean, we're talking these were all teenagers.
Yeah, the teenagers without their families involved in the interrogation, which is itself problematic. And, it's just threats and threats and threats. And if you don't give up Eddie, then you must have done it. You know something that you're not telling us. And it's just, it takes an extraordinary person, especially as a teenager, to resist that kind of pressure.
Sure.
Nobody has money to go out and get a high-powered lawyer to say, leave my client alone. And eventually these kids all give various, inculpatory statements against Eddie. So, that combined with the DNA, combined with what we learned to be the suppressed blood evidence, was like, just a trifecta of strong exculpatory evidence.
How old are they now? They're in their 40s?
Yeah, Eddie's age, yeah. And they all eventually recanted except for Hawaii. So anyway, we were all very crestfallen when the Conviction Integrity Unit didn't accept the case. After the CIU said no, and the senior district attorney who took a second look basically said, yeah, I think there was, I don't think he ever came out and said, I think Eddie Ramirez is not guilty or didn't do it. But what he said is this is a troubling conviction and he's entitled to a new trial. Right. But even then, we had hoops to jump through. And it really wasn't until Eddie was sitting in courtroom in front of Judge DeClaudio when the district attorney's office moved to dismiss the case, thereby ending it, that we knew it was going to happen for real. Yeah. So I was eating my words like, you're going home, Eddie, it's all going to be okay, to like, sweating it out with Eddie, thinking, oh my God, this, it's got to happen because.
Well, it was really, when they were making the argument, the one part where I was like, oh, wait a minute, this feels funny, is when the district attorney's office was making the argument that my conviction should be vacated because it was a two-phase ending. The judge was sort of interrogating the assistant district attorney as to why my conviction should be vacated. And so in my mind, I said, wait a minute. Has he not read the file? Like, is there a chance here that he might actually disagree with the Commonwealth's, suggestion that the conviction should be vacated?
And now you're getting worried because you were wrong before. You had been convicted.
Yeah, and it's uncommon for a judge to disagree with the Commonwealth.
Sure.
Right? And here goes the Commonwealth basically saying, yeah, we're not taking a position on Eddie's guilt or innocence, but we think he deserves. Clearly, the Brady violations are significant, and he deserves a new trial. And the Commonwealth is conceding. What more does the judge need? The judge is the arbiter of the sides. And if the two sides agree, is it legal? Is the question. And it was legal. So the way his posture had me thinking like, whoa, this could be something.
It was not clear at that point it was going to happen because you don't know how Judge DeClaudio is viewing all this.
But once he vacated the conviction and ordered them 30 days to decide whether they were going to retry me or not, at that point I was kind of like, okay, I could breathe a little easier now. Yeah. I'm not out the woods yet because I'm still in prison, but I thought that was a major hurdle to overcome.
The conviction was vacated and you're still in prison?
Yeah, because they give the Commonwealth 30 days to decide whether they're going to appeal the decision of the court or retry you. They have options at that point. But it was a given everything that was sort of uncovered in the case, I think there was very little chance. And ultimately, Krasner did come out on record and state that I was innocent and that there was the possibility of them reopening the investigation to determine who the actual killer was.
Well, now they have a DNA profile, yeah.
Right? Yeah, but the DNA profile, I mean, look, that's on them. I'm not going to be the investigator in the police department to try to solve the crime for them. That's way beyond my skill level. They do have good tools. Hopefully they are sort of continuing that investigation because all sides deserve justice.
Have you heard from the family of the victim?
No. No, and I wouldn't expect to.
So they really made you wait actually almost 30 days.
29 days total.
Well, it almost got worse because the day that Eddie was his case was dismissed, they didn't produce him from Graterford to court, and the judge was going to continue it for like 60 days. He went.
Oh my God.
No. Wait. So okay. So there was some confusion.
Right, you were there. But
They took me to court, but when I got to the courthouse, I wasn't on the sort of the intake manifest, right? And I thought that was strange. And so they said, "Oh no, let's just go sit in the cell. When they want you, they'll call for you." And I'm like, "Well, how are you gonna call for me if you don't know I'm here?" And so I convinced one of the sheriffs to call up to the 10th floor to let them know that I was in the building. And it just so happened to be that at that time, DeClaudio was thinking about, well, where is he at? He's not here. How is he not here? We're gonna postpone this for 15 days. And I'm glad that I had the sort of like foresight to be like, hey,
I'm here.
Can you give them a call upstairs?
He actually, the judge threw me out of the courtroom, and I get along quite well with Judge DeClaudio because I respect him and he does his job and I do mine. But he threw me out of the courtroom that morning because I was on the phone with the sheriff learning that Eddie was in fact in the building, and I was trying to communicate that, and that's a real no-no to be on a phone in a courtroom.
Yeah.
So he's like, Wiseman, get out of my courtroom, and I had to ask permission to come back in, which is pretty amazing.
Well, good thing, because that was the day that everything was dismissed.
And I can say this about DeClaudio because I know a little about him going back to his days as a defense lawyer. He knows the deal. He knows the tricks that were played, and it's him sitting on the bench is in the interest of justice, because I really do believe he's a person who's kind of committed to it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what was that moment like when you guys find out all charges are dismissed and you're done?
Oh man, I cried.
Yeah.
I hugged Mike when I cried.
Yeah.
The best moment was, so let me tell you, I'm gonna try to make this story as quick as possible.
Okay.
So when you go to court, they wake you up in the morning at 4:00 in the morning, and everybody that's going to Philly County, they put them all on the same bus. So a van will hold, I think, like 8 guys. So 8 guys that get put on that van. That van will pick up those same 8 guys to bring them back. So that means you have to wait until all the other 7 guys are done with their whatever proceedings they're going through before you can go back to the jail. That day, I went down with one other person. And I thought, shit is going my way. As soon as he's done, we're going back. I should be back at Phoenix, because Graterford is closed now. I should be back at Phoenix by maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'll be out while the sun is up. That's what I thought. That guy was done. And instead of them putting us back on the van, they waited for, few people from Norristown, whatever that county jail that is, Montgomery County, and SCI Chester. And so the sheriff says, sorry, Phoenix guys, we're going to drop them off first. You guys are going to be the last ones. So what would have normally been an hour and a half, like van ride, turned into like a 4-hour journey. Oh my gosh. And I was like, oh,
you had a roller coaster day.
Shit. I was like, yo, this is, they're going to get every minute out of me that they can. Yeah. I was pissed.
Well, you didn't get released until like midnight.
Right. Well, it was like 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Well, so, but here's what happened. While we were on the van, the report came on. One of the guards was watching, one of the sheriffs was watching on his phone. And so he yells to the back of the van, hey, Ramirez, they just announced it, man. You're going home. Right. And so people in the van are like really happy, like, oh man, congratulations. There was this one kid. He was like, yo, how long you been down? I said, man, I've probably been down your whole life. And he's 24 years old. Mm-hmm. So he was like, I'm 24. I'm like, yeah, man, you weren't even born when I went to prison. We got into talking, and he's from a particular part of the city that I know is the younger guys are having beef with another part of the city. Mm-hmm. So we're talking, and I'm telling him about my experience at Graterford, and he says to me, yo, I just want to be somewhere where I could take my son out and not be afraid of what's going to happen. Mm. And so I said to him, well, how important is that? He said, it's everything. And so I said, well, then everything you do should be about that. And then it dawned on me, yo, God put me on this van to give that one last lesson to somebody on the inside. And so however long the trip was, I stopped thinking about the time because I was like, man, I got an opportunity to do that in that location one last time, because I'm gonna, for the rest of my life, I'm gonna do whatever I can to be a brother to whoever needs it. And so I just stopped being angry, and I was like, man, I'm going home. But when they released me, when they opened up the doors, and there were guards who had respect for me. They embraced me. And when I come out the doors, were you there, Mike?
No, they wouldn't let me in.
Were you at the Wawa?
I was at the Wawa.
Yeah. So Neelam
it was a Wawa after.
Well, there was because they let me. There's a Wawa at the off the property. But Neelam, the Sangvi was there, and Amelia Maxfield was there, and my father, who I had not seen run in 30 years, ran to me.
Yep.
That one's gonna be with me for a while.
What's your relationship with him like now?
Oh man, that's my best friend. That's my best friend, and I'm just so happy. Like, I wonder sometimes if he thought he was gonna live to see the day that I would come home. And I'm so happy that he did.
Do you think he has a different perspective on law enforcement and justice these days?
I'm sure, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah,
because I think it's a sore subject for him. But I'm sure that
really, you have
How could he not?
Yeah. So tell me about your life now. What are you doing? I mean, you just got out.
Yeah, I run the world.
But I know how you guys are. You've probably done a million things in that time.
Listen, I was trained by one of the best.
I know.
So I am working for the Mural Arts of Philadelphia. I just applied for a Art for Justice Fellowship grant to produce my own mural. I'm also going to be doing something for the Clean Slate Initiative.
What's that?
The Clean Slate Initiative is about second chances for people coming home from prison, sort of terminating someone's probation if they have been without incident for a period of time, reducing the length of their parole, employment opportunities. And so I'm glad to be a part of that.
Are you dating? Do you want kids?
Oh no, yeah, I have a girlfriend. she is my, we went to high school together. She has been with me for the last, she has been a friend throughout. It was only in recent years that we decided to take things to another level. And like I said, I'm a loyal person. And so if you commit to me, I commit to you. And I love every minute that I'm with her.
So you met her in prison, or you reconnected when you were in prison?
Well, we never lost touch.
Okay.
We just decided, she had sent me an email, and her mother had passed. And so she had sent me an email. We were talking, and she said, how about I go see your parents and learn how to cook some of the meals that you like for them to prepare for you in the event that they're not here when you come home.
Oh my God.
And so, like, my family loves her. I love her.
And that was kind of like the turning point.
Well, no, the turning point was when she said, I don't want to act like you're mine, but you're mine. And so I said, look, if I love nothing else, it's to be claimed. And so
what are y'all's plans for the future?
Me and her? Mm-hmm. We're going to take it day by day. I'm not going anywhere. I don't see her going anywhere. I'm trying to get in the right position to just make our life as wonderful as possible.
Wow. It's amazing. So I want to ask you, do you have any kind of like call to action? We usually do, a lot of people are still incarcerated. We say like, you can do this to help them. Yeah. Is there anything people can do to help you, or any of the programs that you do or that you want them to know about? We want to put it all out there.
Well, people can find me on Instagram at 76 Concepts. And of course, Eddie Ramirez on Facebook. And any ideas that you have to sort of like transform how prisons operate, get at me and we'll discuss it. I'm a go-getter. I will use whatever resources I have and whatever connections I've built to try to make those things happen.
So I want to call Suave because there's something you don't know from Suave. So let me see if I can get him on the phone really
I'm
quick.
not a fan of surprises, man.
You're gonna like this
And,
surprise.
I'm definitely afraid that you're gonna call Suave.
Well, he knows you're here.
Yeah, but I don't know what he's gonna do.
No, he's not gonna do shit. He's just excited you're here and we're finally meeting.
Yeah. Now he's not gonna answer.
Yeah, now he's not gonna answer even though he's been calling me all morning. It's classic Suave.
You want me to call him? Because maybe if he gets a call from me and you.
Yeah, right? Yeah, try him. Well, he called me as you were sitting here and I was like, Suave, I'll call you back in like 20 minutes.
I saw that. I know.
So what I wanted you to know, Suave is not here for it, but when Suave was in prison and I was doing the Suave podcast and we were talking.
Maggie, don't make me cry.
You are gonna cry. He was talking to me and, I had never thought about wrongful convictions before. I was working on juvenile lifers. I was talking about guys who had done crimes and Suave just mentioned you to me. And he said, I do have a friend in here who actually didn't do the crime. And that blew my mind. I had never thought about that. And because of you is why I started looking into wrongful convictions.
Oh, wow.
I'm glad.
The good that you've done and you don't even know about.
I'm glad, man. Listen, I met Jake Tapper the other day. This is like
that's crazy.
No, and I hugged him because I said, you don't know how important it is, not just to the people who are in prison, that you're putting this on a national stage, and the podcasts such as this are putting this on a national and international stage. It's not just important to the person that's in prison. It's important to the families who don't get the opportunity to sit here and talk to you the way I'm talking to you. I wish I had known, and we absolutely have to include my sister in this, because I've said it from the beginning. And when we talk about criminal justice, just in general, it's almost always from the point of view of the person who is in prison, who is directly being sort of impacted by the injustice. When there is a support team around that person who feels devastated, who feels powerlessness, right? And it would be great if we could create sort of organizations and sort of collaborations to address that, because they need it. They need it. I don't want to say just as bad as the people in prison, because in my opinion, there is no more egregious injustice than an innocent person sitting in prison. But damn, man, those families, I've heard them cry.
Yeah. That's why we like to include loved ones. So finally, do either of you have any final thoughts? Anything else you want to say? Something you missed?
I've been doing this a long time, and I think some people think I'm naive about it, but I've always maintained that some of the best people in the world I've met are people in jail.
Yeah.
And Eddie just proves my point. It's remarkable how he's kept his head together.
Wow.
And focused and directed and yet humble. It's really impressive.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just really grateful. I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful to Suave. I'm grateful to it's been challenging. But thankfully I have great people like Michael to sort of always direct me. Right? They're my compass. And think about your relationships with people and always try to be somebody's compass, because they need it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely welcome.
Yeah. Thank you both for being here.
I appreciate you guys.